She was sitting in a black SUV, wearing diamond earrings and a silk dress that cost more than her husband earned in 3 months. And she was crying, not because she was sad, because she was finally leaving. Grace pressed her forehead against the cold window and watched her apartment building disappear into the rain. The children were inside. David was inside. Everything she had built across 11 years of marriage was inside that building, and she was driving away from all of it without looking back. Or so she told herself. What she did not know, what nobody warned her about, was that the road she was choosing would not lead her to freedom. It would lead her to something so dark, so humiliating, and so irreversible that she would one day sit outside that same apartment building at midnight, soaked from rain, begging to be let back in. This is the story of Grace, a woman who confused suffering for weakness and luxury for love, a woman who abandoned the people who needed her most, and discovered, far too late, exactly what she had thrown away. Stay with this story, because before it ends, it will ask you something deeply personal about your own life. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And if you are new here, click the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Your subscription means a lot, as it helps this video reach other people. Now let's go back to where everything truly began. Grace had not always been the kind of woman who broke things. There was a specific time she could identify if you pressed her, when she was the kind of woman who fixed things, who stayed up late sewing school uniforms because she could not afford new ones, who watered down soup to make it stretch across 3 meals, who smiled at her children during power outages and turned off the lights into games, into adventures, into stories, so they would not feel the weight of what was missing. That version of Grace was iron, but iron, under enough heat and pressure, eventually bends. She had married David at 26. He was a mechanic then already, not because he lacked ambition, but because his hands were built for it. He could diagnose a failing engine the way a doctor reads symptoms. He was proud of his work, and in the early years, Grace was proud of him too. They were poor, but they were warm. 2 children came quickly. Kayamika, their eldest daughter, who had Grace's stubborn eyes, and little Emeka, who had David's wide smile and the habit of asking questions that had no easy answers. The plan had always been simple. David would save. Grace would work part-time. They would build slowly, the way their parents had built, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice, until one day they looked up and realized they had made something real. But Lagos had its own plans. The rent went up. Then again after that. The workshop David worked at closed down, and he spent 4 months finding another. The children's school fees became a quarterly emergency. Grace's small market stall, where she sold provisions and household items, barely covered transport back and forth. The electricity bills came for months when they could not afford them. They ate, barely. They survived. And in surviving, something else began to die quietly between them. It was not dramatic. There was no single argument that broke things. It was more like a slow erosion, the kind you do not notice until you look at the rock one day and realize the shape has changed completely. David stopped asking Grace how she was feeling, because he already knew the answer, and knowing it made him feel helpless. Grace stopped telling David her fears, because every conversation about money ended in silence that lasted for days. They became 2 people sharing a bed, sharing worry, sharing exhaustion, but no longer sharing themselves. Grace began to feel invisible, not unloved. David loved her. She knew that, but love without attention is like a fire without oxygen. It may still exist technically, but it cannot give warmth. And Grace was cold. She had been cold for a long time. She was 38 years old, beautiful in a way that only real living gives a woman, the kind of beauty that has something behind it, and she felt completely unseen. That was when Mr. Kingsley walked into her life. The first meeting was unremarkable on the surface. Grace was at a pharmacy near the market, counting coins in her palm, quietly doing a calculation between her blood pressure medication and Emeka's malaria treatment, knowing she could only afford one. She chose Emeka's without hesitation. That was the easy part. The hard part was turning to leave while the pharmacist looked at her with that particular pity that poor people learn to recognize and despise. "Excuse me." The voice came from behind her, deep, unhurried, the voice of a man who had never in his life been in a rush because the world adjusted its pace to his. She turned. He was perhaps 62 or 63, well dressed in the quiet way that truly wealthy people dress. No logos, no excess, just fabric that draped perfectly and shoes that were polished without effort. His face was distinguished, with the kind of groomed gray at his temples that men in expensive magazines have. He was holding her medication. "You forgot this," he said. "I did not forget it," Grace said, because she was too tired for pretense. "I cannot afford both." He looked at her for a moment. Then he turned to the pharmacist. "Both, and anything else she needs." Grace opened her mouth to refuse. He raised one hand slightly, not dismissively, but gently, like a man who understood that pride was all some people had left. "Please," he said quietly, "allow me." She let him. She should not have. She knew that, even then, in the pharmacy, with the medication in her hand and this stranger's receipt on the counter. But she was exhausted, and exhaustion is the enemy of wisdom. He did not ask for her number. He did not flirt. He simply smiled a warm, composed smile and said, "I hope your child recovers quickly." Then he left, and Grace stood in that pharmacy for a full minute, holding medication she could not have paid for, wondering about a man who had asked for nothing in return. He found her again 3 days later. She was at the market when a young man in a neat uniform approached and handed her an envelope. Inside was a note, handwritten in confident cursive, and a thick fold of naira that made her hands tremble. The note said, "I passed by and thought of you. No expectations. Just kindness. K." She should have returned it. She told herself she would return it. She did not return it. The money paid Kayamika's school fees for the term. It bought David new work boots he had been needing for months. It put food in the refrigerator for 2 full weeks without counting. And in the quiet of the kitchen that night, looking at her family eating properly for the first time in what felt like months, Grace felt something shift inside her. A door she did not know was locked had cracked open, and the air coming through was different, lighter, warmer, and terribly dangerous. Mr. Kingsley, whose full name she would later learn was Emmanuel Kingsley, and who everyone called Chief, called her 3 days after the envelope. "Did it help?" he asked. "It helped," she said. "Good." Long pause. "Can I call you again?" Another pause. Grace stood in the bathroom with the door locked, the tap running so David would not hear. "Yes," she said. And there it was. The first lie, not spoken, but lived. Because every conversation after that was a secret, and secrets between a married woman and another man are not neutral. They are choices, small ones at first, then larger ones, until one day the choices have accumulated into a new life that has replaced the old one so quietly you barely notice the transition. Chief called every 2 days. He never said anything inappropriate. He asked about her day. He asked about her children by name. She had mentioned them once, and he remembered everything. He asked what she wanted from life. Not what she needed, but what she wanted. And the question stunned her because David had not asked her that in years. Not because he did not care, but because wanting things felt like cruelty when there was not enough for necessities. "I wanted to be a nurse," she told Chief one evening, sitting on the back steps of her building while David and the children watched television inside. "Before everything, I was accepted to a college program. I deferred it once for money, deferred it again when I got pregnant. Then it just stopped being possible." Chief was quiet for a moment. "It is not too late," he said. "For women like you, it is never too late. Women like you." 2 words that should have meant nothing. But for Grace, who had spent years feeling like she belonged to a category of people life was happening to rather than for, those 2 words felt like being recognized for the first time. She was in serious trouble. She just did not know it yet. David noticed a change before Grace acknowledged it herself. She was laughing differently, checking her phone in the bathroom, buying a new blouse without explaining where the money came from, coming home from the market with her eyes somewhere else entirely. One evening in October, he came and sat beside her at the kitchen table after the children had gone to bed. He put both hands flat on the table the way a man does when he wants to say something honest and difficult and is gathering the courage. "Grace," he said. Look at me." She looked at him. His eyes were tired. Not angry tired. Afraid tired. There is a difference, and she recognized it. I know things are hard, David said. I know I am not the man I planned to be for you. Not yet, but I am trying. I wake up every morning trying. And I need you to tell me if something has happened that I should know about, because I would rather hear a painful truth from you than live inside a comfortable lie. Grace's throat tightened. She thought of Chief's voice, his handwriting, the envelope, the school fees. Nothing is happening, she said. David looked at her for a long time. Okay, he said quietly. Okay, Grace. He went to bed. She stayed at the kitchen table until midnight, and when she finally cried, she pressed both hands over her mouth so no one would hear her. Looking back later, Grace would identify that night as a moment she made her real decision. Not when she eventually packed her bags and left, but that night at the kitchen table, when she chose to lie over the truth and sealed something between herself and David that she could not easily reopen. The weeks that followed moved with strange, accelerating logic. Chief invited her to lunch, a restaurant she could not have afforded to enter, and she went. Then dinner. Then a Sunday afternoon at a hotel suite he kept for business visits where they talked for 4 hours and nothing physical happened, which somehow made everything more intimate. He was careful, deliberate, patient in a way that only predators or deeply patient men are patient, and at the time Grace could not tell which he was. He showed her photographs of his properties, his house in Lekki, his apartment in Abuja, a small villa in Ghana he used twice a year. He was not showing off, or rather, he was showing off in a way that felt like generosity, which is the most dangerous kind. I have been married, he told her once. Twice. Both ended badly. Not because of money. Because I was not paying attention. He looked at her directly. I am older now. I know how to pay attention. What do you want? Grace asked him directly. Company, he said. Real company. Someone who has lived life and understands it. Not a young girl who wants my money. Someone, he paused, like you. It was such a precise thing to say. Like you, as if he had studied her and designed the answer to fit perfectly into the shape of what she needed to hear. I am married, Grace said. I know, he said. Another pause. That can change, he said, if you wanted to change. She did not answer him that day, but she thought about it every single day for 2 weeks. She thought about it while making David's food, while washing Emika's school uniform, while listening to Kayamika practice the small keyboard they had bought secondhand. She thought about it with a kind of obsession that she was not proud of but could not stop. The way you think about an exit door when a room has become unbearable, and the room had become unbearable. Not because David was a bad man, but because the life they were living was crushing her, and she could not see a way forward from the inside of it. The morning Grace packed her bags, David had already left for the workshop before dawn. She told herself this was mercy. She did not want him to see it happen. She told herself many things that morning, a whole architecture of justification she had been building for months. Every small lie and secret adding another brick until the structure was tall enough to stand on. Kayamika was 16 and understood things too well for Grace's comfort. When Grace came out of the bedroom with the bag, Kayamika was standing in the corridor. She said nothing at first. She just looked at the bag. Where are you going? Kayamika asked. Her voice was flat. Protective flatness. The kind teenagers use when they already know the answer and are preparing themselves. I need to sort some things out, Grace said. With who? Kayamika. Mummy. The girl's voice broke on that word, cracked right down the middle, and something in Grace almost stopped everything. Almost. Mummy, please. Whatever it is, we can fix it. You and Daddy can fix it. Don't go. I will come back, Grace said. People say that. Kayamika said quietly. They always say that. Emika appeared from the bedroom doorway, rubbing his eyes, too sleepy to fully understand what was happening, only sensing the wrongness of it. Mummy, are you going somewhere? He asked. Grace crossed the room and hugged him. She held him too tight and for too long, and when she stepped back, his small face was confused and slightly alarmed. Be good for your father, she said. Okay, he said, not understanding what he was agreeing to. She did not hug Kayamika because she knew if she did, she would not be able to leave, and she had made her decision. She told herself she had made her decision. Chief's car was waiting downstairs. As it pulled away from the street, Grace looked straight forward and did not look back. What she did not see, what she would only learn much later, was Kayamika standing at the window of their apartment watching the car leave, with the specific stillness of a child who has just understood something adult and devastating about the world. If you are still watching up to now, type "I am still here" in the comment section, because what happened inside Chief Kingsley's mansion was something Grace was completely unprepared for, and it begins right now. The house in Lekki was everything he had described and more. A compound behind high walls with a gateman who bowed when they entered. A main building with a marble foyer and chandeliers that Grace had only seen in foreign films. Staff who moved efficiently and silently. Guest rooms larger than her entire apartment. A kitchen with ingredients she did not recognize. The first week felt like being submerged in warm water. She was given clothes, not offered, given, because Chief had apparently anticipated her sizes with an accuracy she found slightly unsettling. She was taken to a spa. She ate food prepared by a personal chef. She slept in a bed so comfortable it felt engineered. She woke up each morning to quiet, to cleanliness, to the specific luxury of not worrying about anything. She called David once that first week. He picked up after 2 rings. Grace. Just her name. Nothing else. "I am fine," she said. "I want you to know I am fine." Long silence. "The children are asking for you," he said. "Tell them." "What do I tell them, Grace?" His voice was steady, but there was something underneath it. Grief controlled with great effort. "Tell me exactly what I say to Emeka when he cries at night. Help me with the words." She had no words. "I am sorry," she said. "Okay," David said, and hung up. She did not call again for 2 weeks. The change in Chief Kingsley began gradually, as these things do. In the second week, he mentioned casually that her phone had been receiving many calls, and that perhaps she should limit distractions. In the third week, he took the SIM card from her original phone and gave her a new handset with new number. Only his contacts loaded into it, and the contact of the staff. He called it simplifying things. At a dinner party in the 4th week, the first social event she attended with him, she laughed a bit too freely at a joke told by another guest. Afterward, in the car, Chief said nothing. But the temperature inside the vehicle dropped several degrees, and when they got home, he went directly to his study and closed the door. She stood outside the door for a moment. Then she went to her room and sat on the bed, and something in her stomach shifted. A subtle wrongness, like the first tremor before an earthquake. She pushed it down. She was adjusting. He was adjusting. These things took time. What she could not push down was a crying she heard one night in the 3rd week. She had woken at 2 in the morning, thirsty, and gone to the kitchen for water. On her way back, passing the east wing of the house, a section she had been told was for storage, she heard it. Soft, suppressed crying. More than one voice. Children. She stood still in the dark corridor. The crying stopped abruptly, as if someone had heard her footsteps and silenced whatever was happening. Then complete quiet. Then, slowly, the sound of footsteps approaching from around the corner. She moved quickly back to her room and closed the door, her heart slamming against her chest. She told herself it was the staff quarters, staff with children. A perfectly normal explanation. But in the morning, she asked one of the housemaids, a quiet young woman named Adiz who always kept her eyes low, about the east wing. Adiz looked at the floor. "It is storage, Ma." I heard children crying. A pause, so small most people would miss it. "The neighbor's compound is close, Ma. Sound travels at night." And that was all she would say. Grace began watching more carefully after that. Small things she had explained away now accumulated into a pattern. The staff who never met her eyes directly. The way conversations stopped when she entered rooms. The fact that despite the size of the compound and the number of staff, she had never once seen Chief Kingsley raise his voice, because he never needed to. The control here was not loud. It was architectural, built into how people moved, where they looked, what they dared say. She began to realize that she was not a guest in this house. She was managed. The truth came from Adiz in pieces over several nights of whispered conversation in the kitchen while the house slept. "There were others before you, Ma," Adiz said one night, Her voice so low Grace had to lean in to hear her. "At least four that I have seen since I came here. Always the same type of woman. Beautiful, struggling, with children, with a husband who is trying but not able enough." Grace felt something cold begin in her chest. "What happened to them?" she asked. Adiz was quiet for a moment. "He selects them carefully," she said. "He pays attention to everything about them, what they need, what they fear, what they want to hear. He becomes exactly that. And then when they have given up everything for him," she paused, "he takes everything he can take, their confidence, their peace, their dignity, and then he replaces them." "Replaces them," Grace repeated, "with someone new, someone else who is struggling, someone else who needs saving." Adiz looked up then, directly into Grace's eyes for the first time, and there was an urgency in her gaze that made Grace's skin tighten. "Madam, please listen to me. What I am telling you, I should not be telling you. But you have been kind to me, and I cannot watch it happen again without saying something." She leaned closer. "Leave. Leave while you still have something left to return to." Grace sat very still. "The children I heard," she said, "in the East Wing." Adiz looked away. "Some of the women," she started, then stopped, then carefully, "he has a way of making people very dependent before they understand what has happened to them. And dependent people do desperate things." She stood up from the kitchen stool and adjusted her uniform. "I've said too much." She walked out. Grace sat alone in the kitchen in the early morning silence of that enormous house, and she understood, fully with terrible clarity, exactly what she had walked into. Chief Kingsley was not a lonely businessman who had found someone real. He was something far darker. He was a man who had built an entire system for identifying vulnerable women, dismantling them piece by piece, using wealth as the instrument of destruction, and then discarding them when there was nothing left to destroy. And she had walked in with both arms open. She picked up her phone immediately to call David. The call would not connect. She tried again. Nothing. She tried her mother's number, her sister's number, any number she could remember from before the new SIM. Nothing connected. She went to the gateman the next morning and told him she needed to go to the market. He smiled pleasantly and said he needed authorization from Chief before letting anyone out. She went to 3 different members of staff and got variations of the same response. She was not in a mansion. She was in a beautiful, expensive, perfectly maintained prison. She found Chief in his study that afternoon, and for the first time since she arrived, she dropped all performance. "I want to leave," she said. He looked up from his desk slowly, not alarmed, not upset, just measuring, a man recalculating. "Leave where?" he asked calmly. "I want to go home." He leaned back in his chair and looked at her with the specific patience of someone who has had this conversation before and knows exactly how it ends. "Grace," he said, "you made a choice. You left your husband. You left your children. You came here. That world does not simply pause and wait for you to return when you decide the grass is not as green as you hoped." He tilted his head slightly. "Besides, where will you go? Back to that apartment? Back to that man who was failing you? Back to suffering?" "That is my family," she said. "You chose to leave your family," he said. "I did not force you." He was right, and the rightness of it, the horrible, precise rightness of it, hit her like something physical. "I am leaving," she said again. He said nothing. He simply returned to his papers. She went to her room and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. The week that followed was the worst of Grace's life. Not because of dramatic cruelty, but because of something far worse. The methodical psychological cruelty of a man who understands exactly which pressure points to press. Chief Kingsley did not shout at her. He barely acknowledged her. He moved through the house as if she were a piece of furniture that had started to annoy him. At meal times, when other guests were present, he engaged everyone but her. He made comments, small ones, deniable ones, about women who could not be grateful, about people who did not understand what they had been given. And then, without ceremony or warning, he brought a new woman to the house. Grace came downstairs one Saturday morning and found a woman approximately 10 years younger than her sitting at the breakfast table. Beautiful, wearing clothes that still had the shop-fresh look on them. laughing at something Chief was saying with the specific brightness of someone who does not yet know what they have entered. Chief looked up when Grace appeared in the doorway. "Good morning," he said pleasantly, as if nothing was unusual, as if the world had not just displayed its full hand to her. Grace stood in that doorway and felt the last of her illusions collapse quietly. She was not special. She had never been special. She was a pattern, a recurring event that a type of woman this man had identified and exploited and was now finished with, and the machine was already moving on to its next iteration. She turned and went back upstairs. That afternoon, one of the junior staff members, a young boy who Grace had once helped with a school assignment when she found him struggling over in the corridor, slipped a small piece of paper under her room door. On it was a phone number and 2 words, night shift. That night, at 3 a.m, Grace climbed out of a window on the ground floor of the East Wing, while the night shift gateman, apparently the one the young boy had coordinated with, left the small side door unlocked for exactly 4 minutes. She walked out into the Lagos night with no bag, no money, wearing house slippers and a wrapper, carrying only a dead phone. She walked for 40 minutes before she found a roadside buka with an early morning food seller who let her use their charging port and borrow a phone. She called the only number she still remembered without looking it up, her sister, Ngozi, who answered on the second ring despite the hour, who said nothing at first when Grace identified herself, then said very quietly, "Tell me where you are." Ngozi came within the hour. In the car, riding back toward the mainland, Grace looked out the window at the city moving past and said nothing. Ngozi, who knew her sister across 36 years, also said nothing. She simply drove. When they reached Ngozi's house and Grace was sitting on the sofa with tea, she could not drink. Ngozi sat across from her and said, "Where do you want to go?" Grace closed her eyes. "Home," she said, and the word, after everything, was the most honest thing she had said in months. The neighborhood, when she arrived late the following night, had not changed and had completely changed. The streets looked the same. The building looked the same. But everything felt smaller than she remembered, not in a bad way, but in the way that true things are smaller than constructed things, quieter, more real. She stood outside the apartment door. She knocked. No answer. She knocked again. From inside, she heard movement, small footsteps. Then the footsteps stopped at the door, and she knew someone was standing on the other side of it. And she knew who. "Kayamika," she said softly. Silence. "Baby, it is me." Nothing. Then Kayamika's voice, from directly behind the door, just centimeters away between them. "I know who it is." Grace pressed her palm against the door. "I am sorry," she said. "I am so sorry. Please." "Daddy is not here," Kayamika said. Her voice was controlled. Too controlled for 16. "He is on a night job. He is doing double shifts now because..." She stopped. Then, because things changed. Grace closed her eyes. "Can I wait?" she asked. "Outside. I will just wait." A very long pause. "Sit away from the door," Kayamika said finally. "Emeka is asleep. I do not want him to wake up and see. I do not want him confused." "Okay," Grace said. "I am not letting you in," Kayamika clarified. "I know," Grace said. She sat on the floor of the corridor, her back against the wall, and she waited. David came home at 4:30 in the morning. He was carrying a small cooler, food from somewhere brought home for the children. And he was wearing his work clothes, and he was exhausted in the bone-deep way of a man who'd been holding everything together by himself for too long. He stopped when he saw her sitting on the floor. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Grace stood slowly. "David," she started. He held up one hand. Gently, not to stop her, just to slow things down. He unlocked the door, put the cooler inside, said something quietly to Kayamika. Then he came back out and pulled the door partially closed and stood in the corridor with Grace. "You left," he said, not accusatory, just stating. "I know. You left your children," he said. Grace felt each word land. "I know," she said. He looked at her for a long time in the dim corridor light. He looked at the house slippers, the wrapper, the absence of any bag or belongings, and whatever anger might have been in him. And there must have been anger. There must have been enormous anger. It did not come. What came instead was something more devastating. He exhaled slowly, like a man releasing a weight. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Grace broke, not quietly. She cried the way people cry when they've been holding it for months, and the last wall finally gives. Deep, wrenching, whole-body crying, the kind that has no dignity and no performance, just pure grief. David stood in front of her, and he did not hug her immediately. He stood very still and let her cry, and after a moment he said, quietly, "Come inside. You will wake the neighbors." He made tea. Grace sat at the kitchen table, the same table where he had sat with her months ago, and told her he was afraid, where she had lied to his face, and she could barely look at him. "I was so stupid," she said. "Yes," he said. The honesty of it, no softening, no pretense, was almost a relief. "I threw everything away," she said. "Not everything," he said quietly, "but nearly." Emeka found her at 6:30 in the morning when he woke for school. He came to the kitchen doorway and stopped and stared with his huge, serious eyes. "Mummy," he said, the simplest possible word, the most loaded possible word. "Come here," she said. He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and climbed into her lap and said nothing, just pushed his face into her neck. And she held him so tightly that David, watching from across the kitchen, had to look away. Kayamika did not come to the kitchen. Grace went to her room later that morning and knocked on the door. "Kayamika." "What?" "Can I come in?" "No." Grace leaned against the doorframe. "Okay," she said. "I will stand here then. I just want you to know that I am not going to make excuses. What I did was wrong. You were right. That morning, you tried to stop me, and you were right. I was supposed to protect you, and I walked out instead." She paused. "I am not asking you to forgive me today. I am not even sure I deserve your forgiveness. But I am here, and I am not going anywhere." Silence from behind the door. Then, "People say that." "I know," Grace said, "and I know why you do not believe me. I am going to have to show you, however long it takes." Another silence. Then the particular kind of silence that is not hostility, but processing. Grace walked back to the kitchen. She sat with David, and they began, carefully, honestly, painfully, to talk about what came next. It was not a reconciliation scene from a film. There was no sudden embrace, no swelling music, no declaration that love had conquered everything. David told her clearly that trust would take time, possibly a very long time, and that he could not promise how things would go, only that he would not shut her out of the children's lives while they figured it out. Grace accepted this. She was in no position to ask for more than he was willing to give. She stayed with Ngozi for several weeks while she looked for work. The nursing dream, the one that had been deferred so many times it felt fictional, turned out to have a practical form she had not considered. A community clinic near her sister's neighborhood was hiring medical assistants and offering a training program for certification. Grace applied. She was accepted. She returned to the neighborhood. She enrolled in the program. She came to the apartment every day after her shift, not to stay, not to intrude, but to be present, to cook sometimes, to help Kayamika with homework, to sit with Emeka while he did his exercises. Small things, consistent things. The architecture of trust is built in exactly these ordinary moments, not in grand gestures. Kayamika remained guarded for a long time. She had a right to be, but there was a night in November when Grace was in the kitchen cleaning up after helping with dinner, and Kayamika appeared in the doorway and stood there silently for a moment, and then said, "Are you going to stay now?" Grace turned. "Yes," she said. Kayamika looked at her for a long time, that specific assessment that young people make when they've been hurt and are deciding, carefully, how much to risk. "Okay," she said finally. Then she went to bed. Grace stood in the kitchen and pressed her hands against the counter and breathed. David, for his part, was doing what David had always done, rebuilding quietly, without announcement. He had used the months of Grace's absence to take on additional certifications for his mechanical work, adding electrical repairs to his skills, which brought in more clients. He was not wealthy. He would probably never be wealthy in the way Grace had once desperately wanted. But he was building, steadily, honestly, the way he had always been building. One evening Grace stayed late, and after the children had gone to bed, They sat together in the small sitting room. Not romantically, not yet, and perhaps not for a long time, but together in the room, in the quiet, which was its own kind of intimacy. "Can I ask you something?" Grace said, "Ask." "When I was gone," she stopped, "I heard you never said anything bad about me to the children, even when—" "They are my children," David said simply. "Their mother is their mother. Whatever happened between us is between us." Grace was quiet. "I said terrible things about myself in those months," she said. "In my head, about who I was, what I had done." "I know," David said. You never said those things to anyone else." "No." She looked at him. "Why not?" He considered this for a moment. "Because the person I fell in love with was still inside whatever was happening to you," he said. "And I did not think making the world see only the worst version of someone was helpful." He paused. "Also, I understood, not everything, but enough. I understood that we had both been failing, that I had stopped seeing you too. That is not an excuse for what happened, but it is true." Grace felt something in her chest, not quite healed, but moving in that direction, like a joint that has been injured beginning very slowly to regain its range. "Money can repair a house," David said quietly, "but some wounds repair slowly." She nodded. They sat in silence for a while. Outside the window, the neighborhood sounds drifted in. The distant music from someone's television, a motorcycle passing, the ordinary nighttime music of a city that did not know or care about the enormous things that happened in this small apartment. Life had simply continued, the way it always does, indifferent to catastrophe, making space for the next ordinary moment. Grace thought about Mr. Kingsley's chandeliers, his marble floors, the new woman at the breakfast table who was laughing brightly and did not yet understand what she was laughing inside of. She thought about Adie's voice in the kitchen at 3 a.m. She thought about the East Wing. She thought about climbing out of that window in house slippers. She thought about Kayamika at the door. "Are you going to stay now?" "Yes." The question and the answer. The simplest exchange possible. The most important one. Grace looked around the sitting room. The worn sofa. The second-hand television. The children's school books stacked on the side table. The curtain with the small tear at the bottom that nobody had fixed yet. A room full of imperfect, ordinary, irreplaceable things. She had crossed the world looking for something better than this, and found something terrible instead. What she had here, what she had nearly destroyed permanently, was not luxury. It was not exciting. It would not photograph well for the kind of social media videos she had once watched with such desperate longing. But it was real, and real. She had learned at a cost she could not fully calculate, was worth more than any marble floor in any mansion behind any high wall. Not every shining door leads to happiness. Some only test whether you recognize the value of what you already have. Some people spend their whole lives chasing the version of life they think they deserve, and in chasing it they trample the life that is already around them, the love that is real, the people who are staying, the home that is modest but true. The tragedy is not that they never find what they are looking for. The tragedy is that they find it was never what they actually needed. Grace did not get a perfect ending. Nobody does. What she got was a second chance, rare, hard-earned, and not fully deserved, and she held it with both hands and did not let go. That is the story of Grace. And now, a question for you. What would you have done in Grace's position? When life becomes unbearable and an escape appears, how do you find the strength to stay? And for those who have strayed and returned, what brought you back? Leave your answers in the comments. We want to read every single one. If this story moved you, please like the video right now. And if you have not subscribed yet, this is your moment. Click that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. We release new stories every week, and each one is crafted to move you, challenge you, and stay with you long after it ends. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this story today. You never know whose life it might reach. Thank you for watching until the very end. We will see you in the next one.